Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you sounds impossible. I know it does. I have been curator of the Imperial Reliquary for 17 cycles, and I thought I had seen everything our galaxy had to offer. Ancient weapons that hummed with forgotten power, crystals that sang songs from dead civilizations, artifacts so dangerous we kept them in triple-locked vaults. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day Mara Bennett walked into my museum and made a 4,000-year-old death god bow its head. You heard that right, bow its head. My name is Corvash, and I am a Threnodor. We are archivists by nature, historians by calling, and paranoid by necessity. When you spend your life handling relics from 100 extinct species, you learn to respect the dead. You learn that some things should stay buried, and you definitely learn that humans are walking disaster magnets wrapped in skin that bruises if you look at it wrong. The skull arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are supposed to be quiet. The hauler captain, a grizzled Vorkeen with 3 cybernetic arms and an attitude problem, dropped the containment crate on my loading dock like it was garbage. The impact made every sensor in the building scream. Careful, I shouted, my forearms flailing. That could be priceless. It is a rock shaped like a head, the captain grunted. Found it in the Kelrath wastes. Your problem now. He shoved a datapad at me, made me sign and vanished before I could ask questions. Typical. The crate was massive, easily 3 meters tall, military-grade containment, triple-sealed, with warning glyphs I recognized from my academy days. The symbols were old, really old, pre-coalition old, the kind of old that made my secondary heart skip a beat. I called my assistant. Prella, get down here and bring the scanner. Prella materialized from the upper galleries, her chitinous frame clicking against the stone floor. She is Zelthari, which means she is naturally suspicious of everything. What did you acquire now, Corvash? I have no idea. That is why we are scanning it. The preliminary readings made no sense. The skull, because yes, it was definitely a skull, registered as approximately 4 millennia old. It was carved from some kind of bone-stone hybrid that our database could not identify. And here is the weird part. It was giving off a faint energy signature. Not radiation. Not heat. Something else. Something that made our instruments twitch and flutter like nervous birds. This is Kelrathi work, Prella said, her antenna quivering. Look at the orbital ridges, the ceremonial markings. This is from the Bone Empire. I felt my scales prickle. Everyone knows about the Kelrathi. 3,000 years ago, they controlled 40 systems. They had technology that made our current weapons look like toys. They worshipped death as a living force, built temples to entropy, and then one day they just stopped. Every Kelrathi in the galaxy died within a single rotation. No plague, no war. They just collapsed. Scholars still argue about what killed them. I personally subscribe to the theory that they made something they should not have. Is this what I think it is? I asked quietly. Prella checked her datapad 3 times before answering. According to the manifests, this is a devotional effigy, a god skull. The Kelrathi believed these housed fragments of actual divine entities. She paused. Corvash, if this is genuine, it is worth more than this entire facility. We moved it to Exhibition Hall 7. The skull was magnificent in a deeply unsettling way. It stood as tall as me, mounted on a pedestal of the same strange bonestone material. The face was humanoid enough to be recognizable but alien enough to trigger every prey instinct in my brain. Empty eye sockets that seemed to watch you. A jawline sharp enough to cut. And horns, dozens of them, spiraling back from the crown in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The placard wrote itself practically. Devotional effigy of the Kelrathi Bone Empire, circa 2000 BCE Coalition Standard. Artifact, Class 7. Do not touch. For 3 days, everything was fine. Tourists came. They took pictures. They left. Standard museum operations. I started to relax. Then Mara Bennett walked in. Humans are, and I cannot stress this enough, the most aggressively average species in known space. They come from a gravity-heavy death world, sure, but so do the Vorkeen. They heal fast, but the Thalekians regenerate limbs. They are persistent, but the Yorathi never sleep. Individually, humans are not that impressive. It is only when they cluster together and start having ideas that galaxies start burning. Mara was a freelance xenoarchaeologist. I learned this later. At the time, she was just another tourist in a battered jacket, with dark hair pulled into a messy knot and eyes that moved too fast. She carried a worn backpack covered in patches from a dozen different stations. Human casual, which on a scale of threatening behavior, ranks somewhere between harmless and about to steal your ship. She walked through the galleries like she owned them, not arrogant, just confident, like she belonged there. She paused at the Varelian gravity hammers, smiled at the Helixian gene scrolls. Then she turned into Hole 7. I was at my desk when I heard Prella scream. Not a scared scream. A confused scream. The kind that says physics just broke and I need an adult. I ran, all four arms pumping. My security training kicked in, my hand going to the stun baton on my belt. I burst into Hole 7 and froze. The skull was moving. Not much, but definitely moving. The entire effigy had tilted forward. Maybe 5 degrees. Just enough that those empty eye sockets were now aimed downward instead of straight ahead. At the human standing in front of it, Mara Bennett stood there, hands in pockets, staring up at the thing with her head cocked to one side. "Huh," she said. "Just that." "Huh. What did you do?" I demanded. My translator was working overtime to keep my voice from screeching. She glanced at me. "Nothing." I walked in. It moved. Artifacts do not move. This is 4,000 years old. It should not move. Well, clearly it does. She turned back to the skull. "Hello there, gorgeous. What is your story?" The skull tilted another degree. I watched it happen. Smooth, deliberate, like something inside was shifting weight. The energy signature spiked on every nearby instrument. Prella made a strangled noise and started frantically recording data. "This is impossible," I said, which is what scientists say right before things get much worse. The Kelrathi believed these contained fragments of God's actual divine consciousness. But that is mythology, superstition. "Maybe," Mara said thoughtfully. She stepped closer. The skull tracked her movement. "Or maybe they knew something we forgot. How long have you had this?" 3 days. "And it has done this before?" "Never. Not once. Not until you walked in." I realized I was pointing at her accusingly with 2 hands. "What are you?" She laughed. Actually laughed. "Human. Just human. Although," she glanced at the skull again, "my family has some weird history. My great-grandmother was a tomb raider. Real old-school stuff. She brought back some interesting souvenirs from the Kelrath wastes." She pulled something from her pocket, a pendant. Small, carved from the same bone stone as the skull, including this. The skull stopped moving. If a 4,000-year-old artifact could be said to stare at something, it was staring at that pendant. The energy readings went completely insane. My instrument started beeping warnings I had never heard before. "Where did you get that?" I whispered. "Family heirloom. Gran said it was a key of some kind. Never told me to what." Mara held it up. The skull tilted further. Now it was angled almost 45 degrees, bowing. There was no other word for it. The thing was bowing to her. "I think I just figured it out." Prella found her voice. "Korvash, the energy signature. It is building. Whatever that skull is doing, it is accelerating." "Accelerating toward what?" "I have no idea." Mara stepped right up to the effigy. Close enough to touch. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stop her, but I was frozen. She reached out with one hand, holding the pendant in the other. Her fingers brushed the bonestone surface. The skull spoke. Not in words. Not exactly. It was more like a feeling hammered directly into your brain. Ancient, vast, amused, it said, in a way that bypassed language entirely, bloodline recognized, covenant honored. The warden returns. Then every light in the building went out. Emergency systems kicked in immediately, bathing everything in red. Alarms howled. Somewhere, blast doors started closing. I grabbed Mara's arm with 2 hands. "We need to evacuate right now." She did not move. She was staring at the skull, and the skull was staring back. In the emergency lighting, I could see something glowing inside those empty eye sockets. Pale blue, flickering, like distant stars. "It remembers me," she said quietly. "Or it remembers my bloodline. My ancestors made a deal with the Kelrathi, a covenant." She looked at me, and her eyes had the same blue glow, just for a second. Then it faded. "Corvash, you need to tell me everything you know about the Bone Empire, because I think they left me an inheritance." "Your inheritance just killed the power grid." "Yeah," she grinned. "Cool, right?" So there we were, standing in a museum that suddenly felt way too small, watching a human chat with a death god like they were old friends catching up over drinks. The emergency lights painted everything blood red. Alarms were screaming, and Prella was having what I can only describe as a professional nervous breakdown. "This is fine," I said, lying through all 4 rows of my teeth. "Everything is completely under control." "Nothing about this is fine," Prella shrieked. Her translation implant was glitching, making her sound like she was gargling rocks. "The skull is active. The human is glowing. We need to call security. The coalition, maybe an exorcist." Mara finally stepped back from the effigy. The blue glow in her eyes had faded, but she looked different somehow. Taller maybe, more solid, like she had suddenly remembered she was dangerous. "Relax. Nobody is getting exercised today." "Probably." "Probably," I yelped. "Look, I am figuring this out as I go." She held up the pendant again. In the red emergency lighting, it pulsed with that same eerie blue. My great-grandmother, Eliza Bennett, spent 30 years excavating Kelrathi sites. She found this in what she called the Warden Temple. She thought it was just a pretty rock. Turns out it was a lot more than that. The skull had stopped bowing, but it had not returned to its original position. It stayed angled forward, watching Mara with those empty glowing sockets. The energy signature had stabilized at levels that made my instruments whimper. "What is a warden?" I asked, because apparently my survival instincts had gone on vacation. "No idea, but I am guessing it is important." Mara walked a slow circle around the effigy, studying it from every angle. The Kelrathi were not just death worshippers, they were death managers. They believed the universe had natural cycles: birth, life, death, rebirth. They saw themselves as gardeners pruning the cosmic tree. She tapped the skull's base with one knuckle. These effigies were not idols. They were tools. Administrators for the death cycle. Prella had stopped panicking long enough to start recording again. "Say what you want about Zeltheri, they cannot resist documentation. That would explain the energy signatures. If this is some kind of dimensional anchor tied to entropic forces, it would require a living operator, someone to direct its function. A warden," I said slowly. "Someone who watches, someone who tends the cycle. Give the curator a prize." Mara grinned. But there was something sharp behind it. Something that reminded me humans evolved from persistence hunters. "My family has been carrying this pendant for 3 generations. We thought it was just a keepsake. Turns out, we were the keepers." The lights flickered, then came back on. Full power, like nothing had happened. The alarms cut off mid-wail. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart's hammering. "Did you do that?" I asked Mara. "Nope, that was him." She gestured at the skull. "He is done introducing himself, now he wants to show me something." "Him? It is definitely a him. Do not ask me how I know. I just do." She pulled out a datapad from her backpack and started taking photos. "Corvash, I need access to your archives. Everything you have on Kelrathi temple structures, particularly anything about Warden sites."
Absolutely not.
"You just activated a Class 7 artifact. Do you have any idea what the Coalition will do if they find out I let an unsupervised human interact with potentially dangerous ancient technology?" She looked at me, really looked, and there was that blue flicker again. deep in her pupils. Corvesh, in about 6 hours, this skull is going to fully wake up. When that happens, it will need direction, a purpose. Without a warden to guide it, it will default to its base programming. Do you know what that programming is? I shook my head slowly. Entropy management. It will start pruning. Everything within 100 kilometers will begin aging at accelerated rates. Buildings will crumble. Ships will corrode. People will grow old and die in minutes. Her voice was completely calm, like she was describing the weather. The Kelrathi built these things to clean up after cosmic catastrophes, to reset regions where the death cycle had broken down. This one has been dormant for 4,000 years. It is confused, hungry, and right now, I am the only thing standing between it and a very bad day for everyone on this station. Prella made a squeaking noise. How do you know this? Because it told me, when I touched it. 4,000 years of memory downloaded directly into my brain in about 3 seconds. I do not recommend it. I currently have the worst headache in human history. She pressed a hand to her temple. Look, I know this is insane. Trust me, I am having a moment here. But my great-grandmother made a deal. The Bennetts would carry the key. When the time came, we would fulfill the covenant. Guess what time it is? I looked at Prella. She looked at me. We had an entire conversation in that glance. It went something like this. This is insane. Agreed. But what if she is right? Then we are all dead anyway. Fair point. Should we help her? Do we have a choice? Probably not. Fine, I said, all 4 hands raised in surrender. But I am filing the most comprehensive incident report in the history of incident reports. Follow me. The archives were 3 levels down, behind doors that required my biometric signature and 2 different encryption keys. Prilla and I had spent years organizing this collection. Kelrathi materials took up an entire wing, thousands of artifacts, millions of documents, all carefully preserved and absolutely none of it making any sense. Mara moved through the stacks like a bloodhound on a scent. She pulled tablets, scrolls, data crystals. Her eyes scanned text in languages that had been dead for millennia, languages she should not be able to read. You can understand that? I asked, watching her translate a stone tablet covered in angular script. Yeah, side effect of the download. I now know Kelrathi, all 17 dialects. It is really annoying actually. They had 14 different words for dying, but only 1 for living. She set the tablet down and grabbed another. Here, this is what I need. The document was a temple schematic. I recognized the site. Warden Temple 17. Located in what was now an asteroid field. The temple had been destroyed millennia ago. There were more, Mara said quietly. Hundreds of temples, thousands of wardens, a whole civilization dedicated to maintaining the balance between life and death. Then, something went wrong. The Kelrathi got ambitious. They tried to control death instead of just managing it. They built something, a machine, an engine that could rewrite the fundamental rules of entropy. She traced symbols on the schematic. It killed them all in a single day. Every Kelrathi in the galaxy just stopped. The death they had been controlling came due all at once. But the temples survived, Prella said, catching on. The effigies survived. Because they were not alive in the way we understand it. They are older than the Kelrathi. The Kelrathi found them, learned to use them, but did not create them. Mara looked up, and her expression was haunted. These skulls are not artifacts. They are watchers left behind by something that came before. Something that built safeguards into reality itself. My scales were standing on end. What are you saying? I am saying the universe has an immune system, and we just woke up one of its white blood cells. She closed the schematic. The skull has been dormant because there was no warden to guide it, but my bloodline carries the key. The covenant my great-grandmother made was not with the Kelrathi, it was with the skull itself. She promised that the Bennetts would serve, that we would take up the duty of tending death when it was needed. That is horrifying, I said flatly. Yeah, welcome to my family reunions. She managed a weak smile. But here is the thing. The skull does not want to kill anyone, it wants to do its job, which means pruning actual threats to the natural order. Things that should not exist. Things that break the rules. Prella's antenna straightened. Like what? Mara pulled up a star chart on her datapad. She pointed to a system 3 sectors away. Like that. The Vrexian Collective has been experimenting with immortality treatments. Full cellular regeneration. They have kept their elite alive for 200 years past natural lifespan. Sounds great, right? Except they are disrupting the entropy flow for their entire region. Death is backing up like a clogged drain. In another decade, their whole sector will collapse into a dead zone where nothing can truly die or truly live. I felt cold. The skull knows this. The skull feels this. It is connected to the death cycle the way you are connected to your nervous system. It senses disruptions, and it wants to fix them. She met my eyes, with me guiding it. We can do this surgically, target the treatment facilities, end the experiments, let nature take its course. Without me, the skull will just sterilize the entire Rexian sector. 16 billion people gone in an hour. The silence stretched. Finally, Prella spoke. What do you need from us? Time. And a ship. I need to reach the Vrexian Collective before the skull fully activates. Once I am there, I can use the pendant to create a controlled activation. Fix the problem, without mass casualties. She hesitated. Probably. You keep saying probably, I pointed out. Because I am a 32-year-old xenoarchaeologist who just inherited the job of cosmic death janitor. I am doing my best here. She ran both hands through her hair. Look, I did not ask for this, but it is mine now. The covenant is bound to my blood if I do not do this. The skull will do it anyway, and millions will die. So yeah, I am going to fulfill a 4,000-year-old promise made by an ancestor I never met to an entity older than my species, and I am going to try really hard not to screw it up. I looked at her, this tiny human in a battered jacket, carrying the weight of epochs on shoulders that looked like they would break in a stiff breeze. And I thought about what it meant to be a curator, to preserve, to protect, to pass knowledge forward. I have a ship, I said, a research vessel, fast enough to get you there in 3 days. Corvash, Prella protested. We are curators, I told her firmly. Our job is to understand the past and safeguard the future. This skull is both, and if we do not help, we are not doing our job. I turned to Mara. But I am coming with you. Someone needs to document this, and file that incident report. Mara actually laughed. A real laugh, bright and surprised. You know what? I would love the company. Fair warning though, I am terrible at small talk and I snore. I have 4 stomachs and I eat rocks. We all have our flaws. 3 hours later we were loading the skull onto my ship. It took a cargo lifter and a lot of prayer. The effigy stayed in its bowed position the whole time, watching Mara with those glowing eyes. Prilla insisted on coming too. Something about professional responsibility, and not letting me die alone. As we lifted off, I watched my museum shrink below us. My safe, predictable, boring museum, where the most exciting thing that happened was usually a tourist, trying to touch something they should not. Do you think we will survive this? I asked Mara. She was sitting in the co-pilot seat, the pendant around her neck now glowing faintly. Behind us, in the cargo hold, the skull hummed with building power. Honestly? No idea. But if we do, you are going to have the best story at curator conferences for the rest of your life. That is a terrible consolation prize. Yeah, but it is what I have got. She grinned at me, and for just a moment her eyes flashed blue again. Welcome to the family business, Corvash. Try not to die. The skull hates paperwork. And that is how I, Corvash of the Thrinodi Archival Guild, became an accomplice to a human death priest on a quest to save billions by pruning immortals. My mother always said I should have been an accountant. She was probably right.